We've got a question from Ben who says, in order to combat low turnout and voter apathy, should we incentivise voters with, for instance, a £10 food and drink voucher or make it compulsory, as in some countries, to vote, or by some other means? What do we think, Anoosh?
I love this idea. Eat out to turn out.
Yeah, I like that.
I think it's a really interesting question, and I've done a little bit of research. So in a City of London borough election back in 2012, they put voters into a lottery, with the chance of winning 10 grand. And actually that did improve turnout. And then there's another example of this academic, Donald P. Green in New York, who in 2005 to 6 and 2016 to 18 held festivals in New York near neighbourhood polling sites with the option of people to have food at them for free. Yeah. And that actually did increase turnout by 2 percentage points and even higher in presidential elections. But the important thing that he felt was that it actually showed that turnout held up in subsequent elections without the festivals. So, voting is a habit that you form. So once you've voted, you're far more likely to vote again. And we actually saw that in the Brexit referendum, which had a high turnout, and then people continued to turn out for elections after that. It's not sort of an idea that's taken on around the world, I guess, because it would be so expensive and perhaps open for exploitation. As a method of trying to get people to vote, it's perhaps less draconian than mandatory voting,
which is the other option.
Yeah.
So Australia has compulsory voting, and they've got a $20 fine there if you don't vote, which is about £11, I think, today. That's very successful, though. They've got average turnouts of around 90%. It dipped, I think, last year to around 91, 92 in the House of Representatives election. But that's remarkable. If you look at UK general elections, it's often around 60, 65%. It started to dip after 92, I think, and then from 97 onwards. We've seen it tick back up a little bit in the past 3 or 4 elections, but it went back down 2019. So it's very successful in Australia. You can go to court, I think, and they do increase the fine if you don't pay it. So it is punitive. I guess the question therefore is whether you want to have a system which basically the states, or in effect forcing people to participate in the democratic process, or you want to go down the incentivization route and it's slightly less draconian, as you say. I do feel as if it's important to create those habits for people to vote, and it's obviously, especially for younger people and certain demographics, if they vote more, politicians are more likely to listen. And we can't always just assume that people understand that they need to vote to be listened to. The reason that I feel slightly uncomfortable with it is that, maybe it's like a slightly romantic notion of democracy, but it should be something that you volunteer to participate in. And it's okay just to say, I'm not interested and I want to go home and not listen to all these cranks and vacuous politicians shout at me. So that's the only thing that sort of holds me back. But I think when you do look at some of the international comparisons, it's remarkable how successful it is.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I have some sympathy for your view there in terms of it being a process of voluntary participation. We were talking in the previous episode about voter turnout in 97 and in the potential next election that we're having soon. And actually, I do think not voting is a message to governments in itself sometimes, particularly if it's, well, the Conservatives just didn't turn out, in X seat or whatever. It can have an implication for which government gets in, but it can also sort of send a message during by-elections and local elections about how your usual base that you rely on are feeling about you. Because a Conservative lifelong voter might not be persuaded by Labour, might not want to turn out for the Lib Dems, but really doesn't want to put an X in the box for a Conservative because they're so disillusioned with the way that they've been running the country. And that's a message in itself.
Yeah, but I guess the counter is that you can just spoil your ballot.
You can spoil your ballot. And there's a limit to that argument because, of course, you do get demographics that turn out far less than others, which means that we do have an outsized influence on politics by older voters and younger voters. They're not generally not turning out because they're so disgusted by our politicians. They're not turning out because they're not into the habit of voting, and perhaps they, haven't been shown how. And with the addition of voter ID, it has an extra bit of friction to the process as well. But I do think sort of giving out food and drink vouchers perhaps is the easy way out of actually proper civic education and engagement.
And maybe there are other things as well. I was reading one report from an Australian institute, and they were basically saying that if you move the day on which the election occurs, say you put it on a weekend, you can actually increase turnout by around 6 percentage points. That's interesting. I mean, historically, the UK election, general election, has always been on a Thursday. But obviously people have work. If you have it on a Sunday, which many countries do, then people have the full day to get to the polling booth and cast their vote.
We're usually working the weekend following an election anyway,
exactly.
so there's no benefit for us. So there's no personal side to this. But Saturdays and Sundays are different religious days for different groups as well. You may not feel that, you should go out and vote for certain cultural reasons. But also, I do feel like the weekend should be pure and free of politics. But if it would increase turnout by a significant extent, then perhaps it's something that our politicians need to look at. But yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. And I did feel when I was reporting on voter ID that, there are just sort of ways in which we do make it difficult for people to engage in the democratic process. And for some reason, we're making it even harder.
It's a shame.
Thanks so much for watching. We'd love to know what you think. Please make sure you leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed watching this podcast, you can watch more of our videos on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe.